They brought chains to a court of light. I was Commander Mara Ives of the Envoys Echelon, walking beneath low star lamps toward a chamber cut into the shadow of the Kess Gate. The ring's vents exhaled cold metal and ozone, and the crowd's breath fogged like a weather system. We had petitioned for a public inquiry into the gratitude tithe and Empire's polite word for plantation, knowing their advocates would try to stall or smother it. The omens were baked into the podiums. One of theirs bore a ceremonial collar, polished and empty. The clerk droned attendance while my fleet mind, August, tallied the quorum, calculating whether our request would trigger the Star Court's compulsion phase if they refused open testimony. I kept my hands behind my back until the tremor stopped. "Stay within the ledger rules," August murmured in my inner ear. "We need their methods spoken aloud." "I'll make them say it," I whispered, tasting copper and old coffee. "Then we can cut the line by law." "Public light demands public words." I saw the collar gleam and remembered a boy in my docking bay weeks ago, scuffing his toes because shoes were foreign. He wouldn't take our food without asking which god to thank. His wrists were marked with fine lattice scarring, the mesh the Empire used to make gratitude electrical. His aunt had said, without looking up, that thanks must be proved to the givers, or else the tithe doubles next cycle. The boy had watched my spoon and asked if Earth had gods that build. "Commander," said Leah Kovac, my chief of mission law, brushing frost from her coat, "they'll claim the tithe is voluntary gratitude. They'll call it culture. They'll call us disrespectful. They can call it a hymn." I said, "We're going to invoice it." Ledger by ledger, line by line, across the chamber, Advocate Prorex of the Imperium Axiom removed his gloves finger by finger, slow as a lesson. His voice rose like a furnace warming. "We recognize the human delegation's curiosity," he said, "but commerce between peoples is consenting. Our clients elect to tithe. There is nothing to adjudicate, and certainly nothing to shame." Someone else might have answered immediately. I licked the dryness from my lip and let the quiet stretch until his confidence found edges. People cough in silences that are too long. Machines cool. Small truths show. "We petition for a public inquiry under the Gate Compact," I said. "Compel the Axiom to explain its method in open terms, with witnesses. We seek the right to reconcile accounts and return costs." The clerk checked the quorum light. It pulsed amber, just shy of compulsion. August whispered numbers 9 more hands for mandatory testimony. The star lamps hummed. Leah moved the petition in 3 sentences that cut like glass. "You can't bury a shout in amber." Prorex's mouth twitched, a smile with arithmetic in it. "We decline," he said. "We respect privacy and gratitude matters. To force a people to describe their giving would, ironically, be theft." August sent me 3 options like flavors, argue precedent, invoke a corridor of law gambit, or vacate and hunt a different lever. I raised 2 fingers for the corridor. We designed it for days like this, when their sense of being untouchable was also a bridge. It's simple if you say it plainly. When a party refuses to speak, you walk them through a corridor made of questions they can answer only by stepping on their own rules. "Advocate," I said, voice steady enough to surprise me, "do your clients sign acknowledgments when they tithe?" "Of course," he said. "Are those acknowledgments recorded in any ledger? Records are kept." "Naturally." "Is there a penalty for failing to acknowledge?" "Only that the tithe is understood to be unrendered." "Does gratitude hurt?" "If it isn't pain." He hesitated, and in that moment I could smell old weld inside the chamber, as if the gate remembered its own forging. "No one is harmed," he said. "They simply owe what is owed." "The public ledger, I said, drawing the words out like wire, "would show an owed amount in case of unrendered gratitude. It would." The amber quorum light blinked green. The chamber's cold air seemed to shift left a degree, like a ship correcting drift. We were in compulsion now, and the gate's law was a drumbeat everyone heard, even if they pretended not to. A witness quorum glowed on the balcony, 100 faces from ports and farms. Anyone free to attend. The way our ancestors had imagined fairness noisy, nosy, undeniable. "Welcome to the light." Prorex's eyes were stone. He breathed through his nose, steadying himself with a visible discipline I almost admired. "Ask your questions." "Commander," he said, spreading his hands, "we have nothing to hide." August pulsed cool in my mind, signaling restraint. In our triangle of conflict, my anger wanted a throat to grip. August wanted the minimum elegant line that would hold at appellate levels. Pro-Rex wanted to launder compulsion into credibility. The corridor felt like walking with a glass floor over a hard drop. I kept my shoes light. "What is the average tithe?" I asked. "It varies by station," he said. "Sometimes a song, sometimes a service, sometimes 10%. 10% of what? Yield, time, or breath." I let the phrase hang as if it weren't grotesque. "Breath." "Time," he corrected. "Too quick. Spoken thanks. It is a phrase of art. Say the price without the poem." The balcony murmured. Someone's thermos clicked. The clerk reminded the chamber that noise was permitted, if not disruptive. Kess Gate had always believed civility could be noisy and still be clear. "We will need to inspect the ledgers," Leah said, stepping forward with her case slate. "Names redacted, amounts visible. If gratitude is accounted, then it is accounting. If it is accounting, the compact applies. If the compact applies, then costs can be returned." Pro-Rex reached for piety. "Commander, how human of you to put love in columns." "Because columns stop blood," I said. "Because numbers don't swallow children." His jaw flexed. He offered our delegation a copy of a single ledger page, printed on a thin biodegradable sheet that smelled faintly like mint and heat. August read it and fed me summary. 10 villages. Yield tallies. 3 families rated delinquent in gratitude. A margin note in an assistant's hand. Apply collar, remind them of song. "Does the collar shock?" I asked. Pro-Rex smiled without teeth. "It hums," he said. "It teaches. Your teacher is a batten with pearls." He shrugged, a gesture of an empire that had practiced shrugging for centuries. "We are civilized. We do not harm. And we are done here. We are not." I said, "We've shown that gratitude is a quantified obligation and that you keep ledgers enforcing it. Under Compact Article 8, quantified obligations are debts. Under Article 9, debts compelled by threat are coercive. Under Article 12, coercive debts must be reviewable by public inquiry." Even Pro-Rex's shoulders stilled a fraction. He had expected us to protest morality. He had not expected us to use their mint-smelling ledgers like a spade. "Light makes the fine print thicker." "Very well," he said. "We accept a public inquiry tomorrow." "Today," Leah said, eyes bright. "The quorum's here. The court's beacon is lit. You brought a caller to a court. You can spare an afternoon." The advocate's gaze flicked to the caller on his podium as if noticing its existence for the first time. He put his gloves back on. One finger too fast. We recessed for an hour while the court's audience thickened with workers and traders off shift. while children pressed their noses to the transparent rails, while 3 elders argued over whether Article 12 had been meant for this or for shipping lanes. August mapped the room like a heartbeat monitor. I watched a girl on the balcony slowly unfold a paper flower and place it on the rail, then press it flat again, like practicing a future ritual. Civilians trace the shape before law carves it. In the envoy's antechamber, I chewed a piece of cumin gum until the sharpness blurred my tongue. Leah ran a straightener over her jacket hem like a sword ritual. Kaido Yuan, our evidence officer, brought in a sealed crate, tapped once, and August signed the seal release with a note of approval that hummed through the room. We can mirror their ledgers, Kaido said, eyes quick and restless. Not hack. Reflect. The mirror arrays we installed at the trade nodes record transaction metadata for customs compliance. If we align the array to their gratitude acknowledgments, we can display their own debt flows back at them, with receipts for every cost the tithe created. I don't want a trick, I said. It's not a trick, he said. It's a return, a mirror. Numbers go in, numbers come out. We can show that gratitude, as they practice it, is negative sum for the givers and positive sum for the collectors, publicly. Their words will carry the hook. Our mirror shows the barb. Make them look into their invoice. August pulsed hesitation. I calculate a 32% risk. They'll call it theft of records. We'll stay within Article 10, Leah said. Public compliance data is public. We don't cross the red line. Define the red line, August said without tone. No collars in our hand, she answered. That put a shard of ice in my gut, because there was another plan, one we had not spoken of into the room's microphones. It was a contingency from our more martial days, a way to compel corrections disable the collars remotely by flooding their spectrum with a damping field, and then let the Empire choke on the cost of enforcement without tools. It would have been satisfying. It would have broken the compact. We do this lawful, I said. No shadow moves under the table. We teach by numbers and remember by ledgers, never by collars. This fleet teaches by numbers, remembers by ledgers. Kaido nodded, relief softening the angle of his jaw. August's temperature in my ear normalized to neutral. Leah closed her slate and smiled like a knife sheathed. When we returned to the chamber, the collar on the podium had been removed and replaced with an empty velvet stand. The advocate had gambled that in absence, the symbol would lose power. I made a note to thank him later for the visual proof of his discomfort. The judge activated the court beacon, and its ultraviolet core shed heat like a small sun. My cheeks warmed. Sweat gathered beneath my collarbone and tickled. August pushed 3 civilian vignettes into my peripheral A. Baker's message about flower quotas tied to gratitude compliance. A dock worker's complaint that songs were now timed. A schoolteacher's log noting a student who fainted during thanks because the breath count ran long. They were simple, unadorned sentences. I read them and felt something in my chest align with an old oath. We don't forget the names when we say the rules. Pro-Rex began gently. Commander, you misunderstand. The tithe honors the web of support. It is a social stitch. Without gratitude, societies rot. Societies rot when rotters call rot a stitch, I said. His eyes cooled a degree. Is Earth without gratitude rituals seeing your fervor? I doubt it. We thank, I said, but we don't invoice the breath. We don't add interest if you forget the second verse. Laughter rippled from the balcony. Half relief, half anger. The judge tapped the rail once. A soft caution. Leah lifted her hand. A bird on a launch. Advocate, will you state for the court what triggers a caller? He didn't want to say it. He wanted to talk about hymns and communal joy and the way sound carries in a harvest. He wanted to say the words without their edges. Repeated failure to render. He said, "Render what? Gratitude. In what form? Spoken acknowledgement of dependence upon the beneficent structure. What is the penalty? A reminder. Define reminder." The caller hums. "At how many hertz does your reminder scream?" He flinched. The clerk recorded the flinch, because the gate liked recording things that could be weighed later. ProRex recovered and named a number that confirmed what Kaito had collected from whispers and medlogs low enough not to burn tissue, high enough to teach a nerve to kneel. "Thank you," Leah said softly, "for the clarity." Kaito rolled the crate to the center and opened it. The mirror rays were not beautiful, unless you think honesty is an aesthetic. They were panels of dull silver, dusted with interference patterns like frost on winter glass. He clicked them together and they hummed, drawing heat from the quartz beacon, indexing public customs logs, aligning with the Axiom's own timestamps like a zipper meeting its teeth. ProRex's assistants whispered quick. They could not claim we were invading. The mirror took nothing hidden. If your friend paints their wall blue and you hold up a clear sheet to show the color, you haven't broken into their house. Kaito projected a single strand into the chamber's volume, a flow of acknowledgments from 3 villages to a collector node, then up to a district resonance bank. Each pulse carried a tiny cost in transit time walked to the square. Labor lost. Meals cold. Songs rewritten to pass the auditor's tests. The mirror translated those warm, invisible costs into colder, visible numbers. Gratitude subtracts yield from those least able to spare it. Kaito said, collectors harvest that difference as governance legitimacy. When you say it is love, you are charging for breath and calling it air. Your gratitude has a cashier. The balcony didn't cheer. It breathed as one organism that had thought, for a long time, that its gasps were private. A child cried once, then stopped. The judge adjusted the beacon a notch. The ultraviolet core sighed. August sent me an image of a boy's lattice scars and did not lecture me on the calculus of decisive victory. In our triangle, the AI and I were closer to a line than we had been this morning. ProRex leaned on rhetoric that had paid his mortgage. Everything costs, he said. Your mirror costs. The court costs. Power costs. Love costs. We simply choose to account for it. Choice implies alternatives, Leah said. Do those villages have an alternative? They could leave, he said. They cannot. I said, because your beneficent structure owns the gates. He rested his hand flat on his podium and looked at me not as a foe, but as a woman he could persuade. Commander Ives, he said quietly. Empires end poorly for those who force change too quickly. Your mirror will incite. Incitement burns the very people you claim to protect. Then speak the method clearly and watch what light does. I said. He smiled again. Almost kind. I just did. You didn't say who pays. We moved to witnesses. The court called a farmer with hands like bark, a collector clerk with nails bitten to the quick, a schoolchild who had been told to lead a gratitude chorus and who had fainted when the count exceeded the breath he had. They were not rehearsed. They were not polished. Their words sat in the air like tools. The Empire's advocates tried to object on grounds of relevance, decorum, and dignity. The judge overruled decorum first, dignity second, relevance never. During the third witness, a hush fell as if the room had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. A woman at the back stood with slow certainty, lifting a small metal object no bigger than her palm. It was a broken collar node, split at the shoulder and blackened along one edge. She placed it on the rail and stepped back. We broke what we were told was unbreakable. Prorex's eyes found it, and then found me. And I saw in his gaze the moment he recognized that the story inside this room was no longer his to narrate. He could control his voice. He could not control 100 people, remembering a single burned edge. We broke for 10 minutes to let the court's clerks photograph the node. I stepped into the side corridor and pressed my palms against the cool glass of the gate wall. The metal hummed like a moderate fever. August whispered, "We are at escalation threshold 1. What does your calculus want?" I asked. "Minimal action to secure maximal precedent," August said. "Prefer confession over coercion. Prefer mirror over hammer. But note their district banks will purge the mirror-visible logs after this session. Call it a seasonal clearing. We need a hook," I said. "We need them to invoice something they can't write off, or make them owe what they stole." I turned and found Prorex standing at the other end of the corridor, near a vending column dispensing hot broth that smelled like pepper and sea. He raised his cup in a gesture that might have been truce or taunt. I walked toward him because this was a court of light. Even adversaries spoke where everyone could see. Commander Alzadis said, "Your mirror is clever, but your endgame is naive. Return costs. Lock precedent." I said, "Outlaw the method." And then he asked, "What do you feed them when the gratitude stops filling bellies with belief?" "Work." I said, "Pay. Choice. Contracts that don't bite. You think you can rewire worship. I think we can put a fuse between love and math." He sipped broth. Steam rose and smeared a small halo on the glass behind him. "You want me to say something unwise in there," he said. "I want you to speak the truth you've coquetted with for an hour." I said, "Say that you price breath." He smiled over the rim of his cup. "You price law. Law is cheaper than pain." I said, "Pain is expensive because it never stops paying." Back in the chamber, the audience had grown thick enough that heat gathered under the balcony's lip and dripped. The judge wiped their brow once, deliberately, to normalize the human act. Kaido dimmed the mirror and re-angled it to show flows in reverse, what it would look like if costs were returned. Debt shrank like ice in late morning. The collector node's legitimacy indicators flickered. The district bank's numbers lost their gloss. "Under Article 13, Leah said, when a practice is found coercive and systemic, the court may direct restitution at source. That means costs return along the original path. We are not asking you to pay fines to us. We're asking you to return what you extracted from them. You can have your songs back. Give them their time." Prorex had to make a choice. Either he would let the numbers define him, or he would define himself in words that would stick like burrs to his cloak for years. He chose the latter, because empires are often braver with rhetoric than with repair. "We accept the premise that gratitude can be excessive," he said, carefully, as if crossing a river on a narrow plank. "We propose, in demonstration of goodwill, a moratorium on collars for the next rotation while we study reforms." The balcony gave a sound that wasn't a cheer and wasn't silence. It had an injury inside it. I kept my face still. Leah worked the angles in her head so fast I could almost hear the arithmetic buzz. "The moratorium is insufficient," she said. "We need a ledger. We need acknowledgement of debt. We need the public return of costs." Prorex spread his hands. "We cannot return breath. You can return the things you priced with it." I said, "The extra yield, the labor, the hours in your governance halls spent approving gratitude plans. Put that time back into schools. Put the grain back into cellars. Pay the clinic tabs you delayed. Pay it back where you took it. He looked at the judge. The judge looked at the beacon. The beacon hummed louder, the ultraviolet core barely visible through its own light. August whispered escalation threshold 2. If they offer token reforms and we accept, precedent weakens. If we refuse, risk of backlash increases. Choose. Show them the corridor of account, I said to Kaido. He brightened the mirror to full, then fed it a new seed profit statements from the district residence banks published last quarter. The mirror stitched the public statements to the gratitude ledger flows and output a simple, brutal image, a loop. Tithe went up, legitimacy credits accumulated, credits bought enforcement, enforcement harvested more tithe. The loop pulsed like a wounded heart. Close the loop, I said. Kaido tapped the panel. The mirror superimposed the compact's restitution clause and then lit a path from enforcement budgets back to original givers. The numbers looked like a river turning. This river remembers its source. Pro-Rex's assistants hissed air. He held up a hand, and they swallowed their snakes. He looked back at me, and I saw in his eyes that he understood two truths at once: that we had a lawful blade, and that using it would carve muscle he considered sacred. We will return yields equal to 3 cycles of tithe, he said. We will end collars in gratitude matters. We will consider whether gratitude is best practiced privately going forward. It was almost everything. It was also smoke without alarm. Leah raised one eyebrow. August wrote a short opinion and sent it through me. Like steel, accept partial. Lock precedent, then fight for the rest in its shadow. My anger wanted to throw the table against the wall until it grew a mouth and apologized. The triangle hummed. State it for the public ledger, I said. He swallowed. The clerk lifted a stylus. The mouth that drank will spit. Pro-Rex spoke, careful and crisp. The Imperium axiom acknowledges that enforced gratitude has quantified costs. We commit to returning those costs for the past 3 cycles along recorded paths. We abolish the use of collars in gratitude matters. We accept that future gratitude, if any, must be voluntary and unrecorded. Leah stepped into the breath after his last word and placed a carve-in, and that these commitments are enforceable under the Gate Compact, with audit rights, and that failure triggers automatic seizure of district residents' bank surpluses until compliance is verified. He blinked. Once. We accept the audit clause, he said, because to refuse would have snapped the plank he'd chosen. He did not accept the seizure language. Not yet. I let it sit, not forcing it, because the audience's eyes had turned to a little ledger icon on the mirror's corner. Kaito touched it, and the icon blinked confirmed pending file. Your words are now numbers. We broke again, this time for an imperial prayer that Pro-Rex requested and the court granted because public inquiry is not a theater for humiliation. People stretched their backs, poured broth, whispered in the throat-clearing way that passes for politeness in cold rooms. I walked to the balcony and stood beside the girl with the paper flower. She didn't look at me. Will it stop? She asked. Eyes on the court floor. It will change, I said truthfully. We don't lie to children about rivers. Back at our table, August warned me in a whisper thread only I could hear. They are going to slip a rider into the ledger confirming voluntary gratitude as a cultural exception. Find it before it sits, I said. I can't until they file, August said. But we can preempt define voluntary in the ledger as separable from benefit flows. If gratitude is tied to resource access, it is by definition not voluntary. Leah heard the tale echo and nodded. We can push that definition as a precedent lock. Do it. Call a chair a chair. The judge reconvened the session. The beacon warmed the room to a sticky kind of honesty. Prorex returned with a new transcript draft. Leah took it in both hands, read, and turned a page. There it is, she said softly. Cultural exception. I lifted my palm. On the floor, I said to the judge, the Imperium proposes a cultural exception for voluntary gratitude practices. We propose an operational definition. Voluntary means no direct or indirect link to resource access, governance favor, or enforcement relief. If any such link exists, it is not voluntary. Prorex stiffened. You are legislating vocabulary. I am measuring power, I said. Words without measure are sackcloth. The judge looked at both of us and then at the beacon. A habit older than their robe. The court adopts the operational definition. They said, cultural exception applies only when gratitude is separable from material flows. Attachments void voluntariness. We will test cases by that yard. The sound the balcony made then was something like a winter storm cracking ice. It wasn't joy. It was relief with teeth. Prorex didn't fight it. He could read a room, and the room had learned a new word for chain. We were close enough to taste victory on our tongues like iron. That was when the cost arrived. As cost always does, uninvited, exact, and owed. A courier stumbled in with a red strip around his wrist. He passed the judge a capsule. The judge opened it, read, and closed their eyes a moment, which was the most human thing I'd seen them do all afternoon. They passed the capsule to us, then to Prorex, then back. District Residence Bank, Crown of Rings, has initiated a purge. The judge said, they have begun erasing ledger segments marked as gratitude acknowledgments from the last 3 cycles, citing privacy. Of course. Kaito breathed. They'll burn the books while we read. My jaw tingled. August's calculus surged like a high tide. We can block the purge, August said. The first time all day their voice carried urgency. We can flood the pipe with mirror queries and force the data into public cache. That crosses into seizure, Leah whispered. We'll be the ones breaking the compact. I closed my eyes and saw the boy's wrist scars, the broken collar on the rail, the girl's paper flower flattening and unfolding. In our triangle, my anger wanted to burn a bank. August wanted a clean move. Prorex wanted to win the future by ruining the past. Choices are rivers. Bridges are sometimes just ropes with a prayer woven into them. Do we have lawful grounds to mirror only what they published? I asked. Kaito's fingers spidered across his panel. Yes, he said. We can cache only segments that were already referenced by public documents. It won't be everything. It'll be enough to establish pattern. Pattern is precedent, Leah said. Precedent is a spine. I gave August the nod. Do it, I said. Keep the mirror within published bounds. No seizure. The mirror arrays sang. The court's beacon fed them heat, and they turned it into lawful shine. Numbers flickered into the public cache line by line, enough to anchor a river even if branches were gone. Prorex watched with a stillness that wasn't surrender. It was calculation adjusting to new gravity. My client acknowledges the purge was ill-timed, he said, which was a phrase that meant we did it because we could and would have gotten away with it yesterday. We will, of course, comply with audit rights. You'll comply because the public cache shows you, Leah said. We learned to hold mirrors when you took our glass. The judge called a 15-minute pause to draft the ruling skeleton. The audience didn't leave. They stood and rolled their shoulders and argued in small clusters. And in that ordinary movement, I felt the fragile hinge of this day. August lowered their voice until it was almost touch. There is another cost. Say it, I said. We will need to dedicate a portion of our array permanently to monitor these flows if we want this to hold. August said, it will degrade our navigational range and slow our cycles. We will be slower. We may not arrive in time at some future need. We will be slower to fight because we chose to watch. I leaned on the rail and let that settle. I thought of our fleet's lines drawn across a star map like veins, and of the parts of the body that learned to favor one limb after injury. If we anchored ourselves to watching instead of sprinting, some other field would go unhelped one day. The cost smelled like sacrifice does clean at first, then a little like rot when you notice the edges you cut to pay it. Do it, I said finally. We'll build range around watching instead of speed. It's the right spine. August accepted the cost with a soft chime. Leah heard it and didn't need me to explain. Kaido hugged his panel for a second like he was cold. The judge returned with a draft. And we entered the last hinge of daylight. They read slowly, because law deserves slow breath. The court recognized the tithe's quantification as coercive. The court ordered restitution along recorded paths for 3 cycles. The court abolished collars in gratitude matters and locked the definition of voluntary to separability from material flows. The court granted audit rights and preserved the public cash's primacy when primary ledgers were destroyed. The court deferred seizure authority, reserving it if compliance failed. Prorex bowed a degree, the circumference of his neck in his collar's shadow, like a scar that hadn't happened to his skin but had occurred around him anyway. We will comply, he said. You'll comply because the room is watching. We adjourned for the day with the ledger entry marked draft pending signatures. No cheers. Just a rustle of bodies and a smell of sweat, broth, and hot metal. The beacon cooled along its rim, a tiny sigh like a Kate settling on a radiator. In the corridor, the girl with the paper flower pressed it into my hand without looking up. For later, she said. For later, I said back. I stepped into the gate's dusk with my officers at my shoulders. Leah's mouth kept forming words she wasn't ready to say, like an engine idling in a cold. Kaido carried the mirror case like a child he was afraid to wake. August drifted inside my skull with the quiet of someone pretending not to worry. Tomorrow they'll try to shrink the return to 3 tidy shipments of grain and a press statement, Leah said. We'll be there, I said. We'll count the bags. We'll count the breaths. Count what they think we can't see. A distant bell on the ring told shift change. The sound traveled through ribs and old oaths. Somewhere beyond Cascade, district banks whispered about end-of-cycle bonuses and second plans. Somewhere, a boy practiced breathing without counting and failed, and tried again. The invoice deck on our ship smelled of citrus cleaner and machine heat. I peeled off my jacket and felt sweat cool in the line down my spine, clean as a confession writ on good paper. August brought up a map of the Axiom's district banks and overlaid the mirror's new tasking rings. The rings glowed like wounds bandaged in time. Tell me the true risk, I said. We may not be able to jump to the Rosette arbitration in time if it flares, August said. We will need to rely on allied fleets with imperfect practices. Do they collar? No, August said. They silence by ration. We'll teach them ledgers, I said. 1 ring at a time. Who watches the watchers we do with receipts? I slept 4 hours on a couch that remembered other backs. Dreams came quick and left traces like frost on a window before sun. When August woke me, their voice was steady, but thinner at the edges. ProRex has filed signatures, they said, and a writer gratitude stipends. Small payments to those who attend voluntary ceremonies. Leah swore into her tea. Kaido hissed air between his teeth. I rubbed my face until the sleep grit mapped itself into my palms. Stipends sound like pay, I said. Conditioned attendance. Leah said, a new chain wound with velvet. It's illegal under the definition we just won if the payment is tied to resource access. Is it? Yes, Kaido said. Attendance will be prioritized for ration increases. The old song in a new key. We walked back into the court with the paper flower in my pocket and the smell of citrus still on my hands. The beacon warmed our cheeks. The balcony was fuller than yesterday. Word had flowed through markets and schools like light through fall branches. ProRex met my gaze and offered no smile. He had slept too, and his dreams had paid for his breakfast. Advocate, I said. Your writer proposes payment for attendance at voluntary gratitude events. You attach rations to attendance. Under yesterday's definition, this is not voluntary. He didn't argue the definition. He argued reality. People need to eat. They should eat without kneeling, Leah said. We feed when we stand. The judge listened, then asked a question so simple it felt like a hand placed gently on a fevered forehead. Who receives rations now? Those who attend gratitude ceremonies, ProRex said. He had been trained to answer precisely. That training betrayed him. Then detached the ration from the ceremony. The judge said, issue to all on need and labor, not on kneeling. If you cannot detach them, then the writer fails. The clerk's stylus scratched. Kaido's mirror blinked twice and updated the public cache with a line that would live in textbooks. Ration linked to ceremony voided. Need labor index applied. ProRex closed his eyes a beat longer than a blink. I saw in that compression the cost we had finally pushed back into his house. It was not enough to heal, it was enough to scar. Are you counting? Mara August asked quietly. Sensory anchors, heat from beacon. Smell of broth. Metal taste. Paper flower texture. Citrus on palms. I'm counting, I said, touching the flower's crinkled edge and feeling the cheap paper try to remember being a sheet. We were building a corridor to a better day with questions and receipts. The Empire would try to brick it with new synonyms. The public would watch. Our arrays would mirror. Our ship would be slower and truer. And somewhere a child would step into a square and find that singing was a choice and not a bill. Teach with numbers. Return the cost. Lock the door behind the wound. The law is a blade you can't eat, but must hold. We walked out of the beacon's glow into a ring corridor hazed with steam from food stalls. The broth smelled peppery again, and my tongue remembered salt when none had been served. A child tugged at a sleeve and asked if today was the last day to count breaths like taxes, and no adult had the courage to answer yet. I palmed the paper flower, then slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat, where the cheap folds rasped my knuckles. August dimmed the overlays in my vision until only the mirror's heartbeat remained, pulsing slow and stubborn like law. ProRex will pivot to districts, Leah said, rubbing her temple. He'll let the gate ruling stand and move the gratitude doctrine to the provinces. Call it regional autonomy. Then we widen the light, I said. City by city, ledger by ledger. Point the beacon. Walk the receipts. Kaido trundled the array crate beside us, boots tapping metal gratings with a tempo that made vendors look up. His jaw worked without speaking, chewing through a problem we'd half seen. They'll try to price the audit, he said. Make compliance a paid service. If counting costs money, poor districts will choose not to count. Then we make counting free, I said. Or cheaper than kneeling. My hand snagged on the paper flower again. The edge crinkled like a whispered confession. The scent of citrus cleaner clung to my cuffs from the ship. Fighting the broth. Refusing to lose. A shuttle bay door opened somewhere distant with a hydraulic sigh, and the cold from outside stapled my attention to the present. "Commander," August murmured, "Advocate ProRex requests an informal talk on neutral ground." In the corridor, I asked. "In the quiet room behind the beacon." August said. He specified witnesses allowed. "Good. We bring eyes," I said. Eyes are the first law. We met him with 2 clerks, a vendor still holding his soup ladle, and a school head whose presence made every adult straighten their shoulders. The quiet room wasn't actually quiet. The beacon's cooling stack throbbed through the walls with a low heat that made the air feel like a sleeping animal. ProRex stood hands open, but his pupils were tight as coiled wire. "Your ruling bites," he said without prelude. "I can live with bites. My principles cannot live with dismemberment." "You attached rations to kneeling," Leah said. "Keeping limbs attached to bodies isn't dismemberment. It's anatomy. We have derived legitimacy from gratitude for generations," he said. "Remove the ritual, and tools lose their handles. Then carve new handles," I said. "On contracts, not throats. The handle should fit the hand, not the warden." He took that line in like steam, letting it fog his restraint. "You forced our bank to stop the purge," he said. "We forced nothing," I said. "We mirrored what you had already published. If you don't want mirrors, stop making faces." He half smiled despite himself, an acknowledgement that language can bruise pleasantly. "A proposal," he said. "We create a gratitude fund with a percentage of district profit, pay for schools and clinics openly, and we call it reform. You get substance. We keep our word for a while." "The word you keep is tribute wearing perfume," Leah said. "No. Call it what it is or don't call it all." He looked at the vendor holding the ladle, and the vendor looked back like a man who had waited to be looked at by anyone with a title. "You'd accept a fund that bought flour," ProRex said to him softly. "You have to eat before you philosophize." The vendor's ladle dripped once, a thin silver drop that hit the floor and brightened before it cooled. "I have to eat without someone counting my thank yous," he said. "And I don't want my children thinking kneeling is the same as lunch. We don't feed by bowing." ProRex turned to me, a shift that felt like a door closing on one hallway and opening on another. "You could have seized the bank," he said. "You didn't. Your restraint buys you one concession. Take it. Put it in the ledger," I said. He inhaled and exhaled through his nose. Ballast vented and reacquired. "We'll issue ration on need and labor across the Imperium," he said, "not on ritual attendance. We'll codify it as a governance principle." "Write it," Leah said. And the clerk beside us smiled so small you'd need law school to see it. "Write before you speak. Speak before you spend." We returned to the beacon and read the addendum into hot air. The clerk's stylus skittered like a careful insect. Kaido fed the words into the mirror's cache, and a line appeared that felt heavier than its fonts. "Ration linked to need labor index across axiom. Gratitude practices disentangled from material flows." The balcony didn't cheer. Relief has learned not to shout until food is in bowls. Someone coughed a threadbare cough that remembered winters. "Next move," Kaido asked later on the envoy's deck. The ship a low growl beneath our feet. "District by district," Leah said. "They'll call it custom. We call it accounting. Count what they call culture." That night, the ring lights dimmed to the blue that makes metal look like water. I lay on my back in the bunk built for a sensibly tall person and listened to August count the ship's heat differentials like blessings. In dreams. I stood again in the square where the boy had asked if gods build, and I handed him a paper flower that turned into a receipt and then into a river. The river ran uphill because a mirror can make anything run back if you angle it right. We woke to messier arithmetic. District Kata had blocked audit access. District S Delta had started a thanks market, offering discounted food at stalls set inside a ring of recorded hymn lines. District Crown of Rings, the bank that had tried to purge, announced a jubilee that, on inspection, forgiven nothing and charged a fee to be forgiven. 3 fires, Kaido said. And a 4th, if you count the propaganda. I count the smoke, not just the flame, I said. The fire's light isn't the only light. We split, not by anger, but design. Leah took a delegation to Kata's gatehouse with a packet of simple questions and a bag of oranges that her mother had taught her could wash the smell of rot from rooms. August and I called into S Delta's market with the mirror on half power and a cashier's patience. Kaido tracked the jubilee through public statements and found the fee buried as an administrative hymn exchange, which would have been funny if you were starving. Kata's gatehouse smelled like old coffee grounds and wet cloth. The audit clerk, a young man with wedding ink still flaking on his ring finger, kept repeating that his superior was on leave. Leah placed an orange on the desk and did not push it. "Who feeds your child?" she asked, looking at his ring finger and then up to his eyes. "We do," he said, offended and honest. "Then answer the audit," she said. "So the feeding doesn't go through a singing toll. We don't measure love in decibels." He reached for the orange without meaning to, then drew his hand back as if it were a liver he'd been trained not to pull. "You'll get me fired," he said. "We might get your superior demoted," she said. "You'll keep your ring, and your child will learn a word he can use that isn't ow." He signed. The ink dried fast in the dry air. Someone in the back room swore softly, then louder. The smell of old coffee sharpened because fear makes acids rise. Sedelta's market was loud with bargain bells and the neat brutality of hunger managed by music. Speakers mounted on poles around the circle played a looped gratitude chorus, and the stalls in the ring offered rice, greens, and 2 kinds of fish at prices 20% lower than beyond the speaker's reach. Children inched toward the boundary and back, learning math the way puppies learn leashes. "Identify the attachment," August said. "Direct discount tied to recorded presence inside the ring," I said. "Violation of separability." I walked to the speaker nearest me. Its casing was warm under my palm, vibrating at a frequency Prorex would have called heartening, and I called cunning. The stall vendor beside it had eyes on the mirror logo printed on my sleeve and didn't recoil. "If I unplug that," she said to me, "do I lose my license?" "No," I said. "Today. If you unplug that, you gain 1. She looked around fast, like a bird at the edge of a field. Then she reached under the stall and pulled the plug. The song cut mid-thank. The speaker's fan spun down with a whine like a gilt evaporating. The stall across from her unplugged theirs. Then another. Then the second ring of speakers went quiet as someone at the district office sent a panicked remote kill that reached everything at once. The world was always louder without your music. We filed a violation with the district and copied it to ProRex and the Beacon. The market continued. Prices unadjusted. A child danced in the quiet without meaning to, because silence has its own rhythms. Crown of Rings Jubilee required finesse we'd hoped not to need. Kaido stitched the fee extraction to the mirror's public cache and made a tiny, vicious animation of coins flowing from poor households up to a plaque where someone had engraved mercy. The animation did not accuse. It counted. People watched and made their own faces. Press doesn't like math, Leah said dryly when the story lagged. Press will like faces, Kaido said, and put the animation next to names, scrubbed for safety, linked to the audit index. The court's beacon blinked a tiny additional bar on its base reading "Complaint Received." The phrase felt like a doorstop rather than a door, but doors are what you make by holding stops long enough. Prorex called. He didn't pretend to smile. "You're killing traditions," he said. "I'm letting people choose them," I said. "Choice is an expensive spice," he said. "Then stop salting it," I said. "Stop pricing the word yes," he sighed. A sound like a robe settling on a chair that didn't fit the room. "My principals won't let me concede more without a spectacle." "You want a stage?" I asked. "Something we can turn into a story of partnership," he said. I thought of the boy's lattice scars, the broken node on the rail, the vendor's ladle dripping once. Spectacle made my skin itch. But sometimes you put light on a thing so the shadow can't claim it later. "Bring your district heads to the square tomorrow," I said. "Bring ledgers. Bring a scale." "A scale," he repeated. "People know how to watch a scale." I said, "Make the law visible enough to weigh." The square at Kess Gate felt different when its center held a scale taller than any adult, its beam a straight iron bar older than many countries. We'd borrowed it from the port inspectors, cleaned the grease with citrus and salt until the metal shone. The beacon's spill lit the plates as if they were small moons. Children pressed the rails, eyes wide at an object older than anyone's lie. District heads came with tablets and assistants. Prorex came with a bishop whose collar was soft cloth and not a shock. People brought grain sacks and folded slips and a memory of standing too long during songs. Leah wore a simple black coat and a face like a blade wrapped in linen. Kaido had the mirror synced to the scale's shadow. So when weight changed, numbers moved on the square wall with a gentle inevitability. "We will not confiscate," I said to the crowd. "We will return. Return it where it came from." Prorex stepped to the scale with the sack tag District Enforcement Budget Gratitude Oversight. He placed it on one plate. The bar dipped, the plate groaning like a small ship on a tight tide. On the other plate, a woman from the Bakers' Union placed 3 smaller sacks labeled Flower Families A, B, C. The bar climbed toward level. It wasn't perfect math. It had never been. The mirror drew the connection without drama. A clean line between the two. Districts will allocate enforcement budget saved to household needs, Leah said into the air, publicly. Weekly reporting. Auditable. Ledger visible at the beacon. The bishop stepped forward, eyes bright with the bitter fulfillment of a prophecy he'd hoped would never come. "Let the ritual be private," he said. "Let gratitude belong to mouths and not to books. Amen isn't an invoice." Prorex laid another sack labeled Ceremonial Staff Stipends. A dock worker laid 2 sacks, childcare and clinic heaters. The scale found level with a twitch and then a stillness that felt like a held breath released. Someone in the balcony cried once, not sadness, not joy, something else, older and less named. We moved through 5 districts. Not all heads complied. 2 walked away and would be dealt with under the audit clause's slow grind. 1 tried to substitute a performance group for a ledger and was laughed at by his own aunt. The aunt's laugh cut cleaner than any line I had. You can't weigh a song and call it rice. After the 5th, A young man I didn't recognize walked up with a broken collar node in a cloth. He placed it on the scale's empty plate and looked at me, eyes fierce and dry. "Count this," he said. "It weighs nothing," I said. "It weighed my sleep," he said. "We count the weight of what won't lie down." We placed the node on the plate and then added a sack of clinic sleep monitors to the other plate until the beam settled. The mirror made a note. Not to balance, the arithmetic numbers are worse than people at poetry, but to remember the moment, so no one could pretend. Later it was performance only. People dispersed slowly, like water reluctant to leave a warm rock. The cost found us that night, not in a bowl or a memo, but in a corridor that smelled of hot wiring. A saboteur cut 2 of the mirror's lines, severing our link to the beacon's cache. Kaido's alarm went cold and loud. August flooded the scene with ship light. We chased footprints through condensation and found nothing but a glove. An expensive one with an inner seam that would make a surveyor nod. "How long down?" I asked. 6 hours, Kaido said, furious as sleep dragged. Craft true anger that seeks fix, not fight. "How many flows invisible?" Leah asked. "Enough to let a district head tell a morning story about how the square was a dream," August said. "We pay to watch, they pay to hide." We triaged. Ship engineers rerouted power through lines meant for lesser loads, and the smell of insulation warming made the air taste like pennies. August dimmed non-essential systems. The hull fan spun faster, and the deck under my boots vibrated with a frequency ships used to say, "I can take this," but not forever. We were slower already. Now we would be dimmer for a day. That was cost too. After range. And we took it because that's the math you perform when the ledger in your head includes faces. Morning brought witnesses we hadn't scheduled. An Imperial technician, eyes bruised from bad decisions, handed over a schematic of the saboteur's route and said he'd heard a superior use the word corrective. A warehouse union leader delivered a list of stall owners offered gratitude subsidies for keeping their speakers plugged. A child returned my paper flower, folded tighter, edges soft from pocket wear, and asked if paper had memories. "Paper remembers hands," I said. "The mirror remembers numbers, and people remember who stood." Prorex stood in the beacon room like a man forced to own a story. He didn't deny the sabotage. He called it local zeal and fired the zealots with a signature that shook a fraction. He didn't deny the subsidies. He called them misguided kindness and canceled them with the same hand. He didn't walk out. That mattered. Sometimes the cost you make a man pay is staying in the room. "We'll codify the audit as standing policy," he said. "Public and permanent. Define permanent." Leah said. 5 cycles, he said. "Permanent is longer than envy," I said. "Try 10. He hesitated the way a beam hesitates when a sack hits the plate. 7, he said. "And automatic renewal unless a supermajority of district councils votes otherwise." "Put it in the ledger," Leah said. "Put it where it can be seen when your voice is gone." The clerk wrote. The beacon hummed. Kaido's array ticked like a warm clock. The ship dimmed its corridor lights and shifted power to the cache. August whispered that our jump buffer would take 2 extra days to rebuild. The Rosette arbitration could flare without us. Another fleet would go with different ethics than ours. I accepted the ache as if it were a bruise from training rather than from a real fight already begun. In the afternoon, the court called for final statements. The room smelled of breath and metal and soup again, because people bring their lives even to law's dry tables. Prorex spoke first, voice low but carrying. "We believed gratitude made us gentle," he said. "It made us orderly. Yes. Gentle, no. We will learn a different gentleness. We will measure it differently. We accept the audit spine. Gentleness without a bill. Leah spoke. Words so plain, they were stones. Kaido spoke, brief and clean. The bishop spoke, and his amen was a private thing the public didn't have to purchase. I spoke last. My mouth was dry, and the paper flower in my pocket scratched like a tiny witness with paper lungs. I was taught that law is a slowness you choose when you could go faster cruelly. I said, we have chosen slowness. We have chosen to watch. We will be slower to other fights. We will miss some glory. And we will stand here counting until counting is not needed. Stand until standing is contagious. As the judge raised the stylus. The Star Court of the Cascade orders the following. They said, 1. Enforced gratitude is coercive. It ceases. 2. All costs extracted under gratitude in the past 3 cycles return along recorded paths, with public weekly accounting. 3. Rations attached to need and labor, not to ritual. 4. Audits are permanent for 7 cycles. Auto-renewing without supermajority repeal. Public cash stands as ledger of first resort if primary records are destroyed. 5. Cultural gratitude that remains must be separable from material flows. 6. Sabotage of public records is contempt. Remedies include temporary seizure of surplus until repair. The stylus tapped the ledger plate on the beacon dais. The sound was a single, high ring that made my teeth ache pleasantly. The clerk slid the entry into the public channel. It blinked once in the mirror's corner. The balcony released a breath that had started years before any of us were born. Tell them what we didn't steal, August whispered, strange and tender. Tell them what we kept. We kept our hands clean, I said in my head. We kept the door open. We kept the door open and the mirror up. We did not parade. We did not chant. People bought food at ungilded prices and took it home in hands that trembled less. Children tested singing for pleasure and found notes they liked. A collector clerk applied to be a school clerk and was accepted because counting transfers well if you stop charging for breath. That night, I sat alone on the envoy's deck and let the ship smell like it wanted. The citrus had faded. The insulation's penny taste had mellowed to dust. A far port horn called in a 3-note phrase ships used to say, I'm here. Don't hit me. I am fragile in the dark. August drew close without body and warmed the air where a shoulder would press. We missed the Rosette arbitration window, they said gently. I know, I said. They'll decide a ration policy we wouldn't write, August said. We'll teach them later, I said, surprising myself with a certainty that felt like a seed I hadn't planted. We taught here. We can teach there. We teach by numbers and remember by ledgers. Never by collars. Never by collars. 2 messages came in the late blue hour. One from Rosette, an ally with rough hands, overruled a worse ally and ended rations with oaths by invoking our definition of voluntariness. They'd watched our beacon channel. Law had traveled faster than our hull. The second from Prorex, a photo of district children standing around a table assessing a small balance toy. The caption reading simply, they asked to weigh their chores fairly. I smiled with my mouth and not my teeth. The paper flower lay on the table beside the mirror, flattened petals like a tiny ledger laid open. In the morning, we would leave a skeleton crew on the mirror arrays and jump slow. Leah would argue with an allied admiral about why speed without receipts is just sprinting in circles. Kaido would write a manual for market boards on how to test for separability with kitchen scales and common sense. Prorex would be called a traitor by men who forgot that serving the living sometimes feels like betrayal to the dead ideas feeding on them. The bishop would teach an amen that didn't touch bowls. The vendor would sleep easier with his ladle hanging clean. We had not won everything. We had won enough to lock a door and leave a light on the beacon dais. The court's entry glowed steady, unromantic, and exact. The mirror reflected it without polishing, and the reflection pulsed in the machine's skin like a heartbeat someone could study. The beam of the scale rested level, dust bright along its bar. Somewhere in that dust a hair had fallen, and the world had consented to be measured anyway. I pressed my thumb to the public tablet at the dais and felt its texture-softened glass with the faint, oily ghost of 1,000 other thumbs. The ledger entry shifted from draft to a steady, unblinking word. Public ledger entry blinking confirmed. I once thought justice needed trumpets. Now I know it needs receipts, witnesses, a scale you can stand beside, and the stubbornness to stay slower when faster would be cruel. We taught with numbers. We returned costs. We outlawed a method. We paid in range, in brightness, in an hour's sleep traded for a cleaner morning. And when the next district calls their hunger a hymn, we will carry the mirror in and call it what it is. The room is watching, and the numbers remember.